All right, welcome everyone. So today we're going to talk about how to get hired. Let's see, I'm going to move this out of the way. And so we're going to talk about a couple things. So I promised the email that this first half is going to be pretty applicable to any like major, and we're going to just go over like the basics and advanced of how to like write a good resume, get an interview, etc. So afterwards, we're going to talk specifically about some of the questions you can expect in computer science interviews and machine learning interviews and data science, and how you can um, like make sure that you're approaching it the correct way. And finally, we'll be talking about making like how to make a good pitch at the career fair, which is not like that relevant anymore, but maybe it can help you write like a good blurb to paste into the chat. And finally, what kind of skills you can build so that you can like improve that resume for next year. So I think the overall internship pipeline is kind of like similar to like my presentation order, but it actually starts with building skills and putting them on the resume. And so, of course, that itself is like a super big topic that we can't go into too hard. But I think the idea is that it's like a cycle. So for freshmen, it might be hard to get started getting that like first internship. But then once you do, it gets more and more easy to ramp up and like be a competitive candidate. So let's get this started with talking about the resume. Okay, so in order to do this, I'm actually going to bounce off of a presentation that I really liked from someone else. So let's see if this works. Okay, now I'm gonna try to full screen, but it might just freak out. Okay, perfect. So this says CS resume, but really applies to any resume. Okay, so your resume goal is to be a one-page summary people can discuss and pass around. So it's not supposed to be a comprehensive list of all like the accomplishments you've ever had. And it's usually it helps you get to that interview. Of course, during the interview, people like look at it and ask you questions about it. But you know, like you have to remember that there's like a different purpose for the resume versus the interview. So you want to make that good first impression with the resume. So it's also very important that you want to include things in the most impressive to least impressive order. So I think the framework to think about this is that most recruiters are going to look at your resume for like maybe a minute. And so in a sense, there's a scarcity of attention, and you have to make sure that you put that to your advantage by making the most impressive things first and obvious. So if they're buried in a wall of text, then uh, it's much harder to like for the recruiter to see it. They might miss it. So um, in terms of the order that we can include it in, I think education, work experience, projects, open source projects, publications, and any other like experiences with leadership or other like work is a good order to follow. So things that you don't want to really include, and for freshmen, I think this might be a little bit different, but it's probably not necessary to include like every like, tutoring job you've had in the past. If it's relevant or you feel like it shows good work ethic, like that's fine for like your first position. Um, let's see, like the next two bullet points, not that relevant. Maybe like if you have certifications from taking online courses, I think that's fine to put on. Maybe it's less relevant when you're full-time. And then the personal stuff, I think this is it's like people's personal preference. Like, don't make it like too like a big part of your resume, but if you throw on something that you feel like tells people something about your personality, I don't think like people won't get a job because of that. So, um, but like focus on the important stuff. So I think this really powerful kind of idea is the more impressive your experience is, the shorter it can be. So like the US president, right, can have a one-line resume. And that just shows you that for accomplishments that you feel like, are really like can like it's really obvious what the impact and importance of them are. It shows that you can like do it with brevity. And so you want to strike a balance between really describing your projects to do them justice, but also just to the point where like it's still interesting to the recruiter. And that's what we're going to go into in the following slides. I think this is another thing that we just want to touch on briefly, which is I see people like putting like every single piece of software they've ever used onto their resume. And for things like CS jobs, I think most jobs that Caltech students wanting to do, things like Microsoft Office, like Windows is not really important. Like for example, my resume, I list like the most important like CS languages and CS frameworks that I use. And I tried not to like barrage people with too much because, for me, like MATLAB, it's like, it'd be nice to put on, but really isn't like relevant for any of the jobs I'm applying to, where it might be if you're doing like engineering or data science. So you want to be selective in like what you put on. Again, because people are not going to read everything. They're going to read like the first couple and then skip to the next section. So I think what's really important about each resumes, and common mistake I see with like kind of beginner resumes, is that essentially, can I adjust this? Okay. People are just too vague. Like they're super vague. They use like super vague like verbs. And after reading the resume, I'm not sure like what they did or like why it was important. Um, so I think these are some good examples of the writing style that we want to look at. Start with a strong verb. Like I redesigned, I designed, I built, I analyzed. Those are all okay verbs. And then talk about like what did you like actually do? So if you're working with a machine learning system, like did you like train a new data set? Did you like improve the pipeline, right? And then what impact did it have? So okay, this like saved developers in my company like hours of their time. And then uh, what tools did you use? And I like putting the tool in this resume slot because then it actually like shows you have experience. So let's say I use like Python, right? And I just put it in the skill section. It's not like clear that I actually like did I use it in a class or did I use it in the workplace? So I like to put it with my like work experiences so that people like know, oh, okay, like he actually used it in like a real life setting. Just gonna skip these. So I think it's important to tailor your resume. So it depends on like how certain you are in your job search. So for example, if you're applying to both computer science and data science positions, or computer science and double lead positions, then I think it's important to like have the relevant skills. So that's like just pretty obvious. If you're like applying for research, for example, maybe you want to put like your research projects and your publications at the top, and go into more depth about them. Like that's totally fine. So that's just another detail I wanted to talk about. And then don't lie. I don't think Caltech students have a problem with this, but this has definitely been a problem at some of the workplaces I've been to where we were talking about people's resumes and like two people have like contradictory things. Like they're like both like the president of some club, and we found out that wasn't actually true. So it's just bad practice. It's okay to kind of like if you built a Python script to like run a SQL query, right? I've like seen people say like that's a data pipeline, or like I think there's a balance here where like don't undersell yourself. Like you don't have to explain literally what you did. Like, oh, I wrote like uh like like if you need to use a higher level industry term in order to describe uh, what you've done in your like previous project or internship, feel free to do so, just to get people a better sense of what you like to have to give people like a comparison in industry with what you did. That's it's like a minor detail, but I think like that's not to say like don't write yourself in like a well presented way, but just like yeah, don't exaggerate what you did. Okay, so I think that's the last slide on this resume deck. Then I'm going to go back to my slideshow where I'm going to give some examples that are particularly pertinent to like Caltech students. Oh, click the wrong button. Mm, sorry, my computer is just seizing up a little bit. Let's see. Okay. I was going to buy a new laptop, but then the new GPUs came out like from NVIDIA. So now I'm waiting to to for them to get into like the latest laptops, but it might take half a year. So I'm still working with this like 4-year-old laptop. Um, kind of like trapped. Okay, so moving on. Um, actually, just before I continue, I wanted to if it was okay for people to type in like their major into the chat. That way, I think this will allow me to kind of give a better presentation. That's because if I know it's uh, like all a certain like type of person, then yeah, this will help. So type in your resume into the chat. Don't be shy. Um, and then um, yeah, I'll just continue with the presentation while people do that. Let's see. Let me get this good stuff. Okay, great. Looks like we have some double E, physics, CS, math. That's a good mix. So now let's talk about like a really like go deeper into this formula of how to write resume lines. So I think this is like a great example of what like a difference between the good and bad line looks like. So, for some position like event coordinator, you could say that you like plan charity events. I mean, that's true, but like no one actually like cares, right? And so you want to like follow a formula kind of like this, where as I was saying, you have your action verb. You talk about like what you're trying to accomplish, and then what was the result, and then that leads to like a really compelling resume description. People can see and visualize like the impact you had at this place, and that helps them like it helps to convince them that you're gonna like additionally do something impactful at their company. So let's go over like a Caltech example. So I've seen something like this pretty commonly. I did a surf and then I'll write something like, I wrote a machine learning algorithm to reduce the seismic noise for LEGO mirrors and created a training dashboard interface in React.js. And that's not bad, but um, if you really want to make it compelling, then you should go into like selectively go into more detail. So for example, you could say I trained convolutional neural networks to reduce the seismic noise affecting LEGO mirrors using TensorFlow, increasing detection sensitivity by 20%. So I added the framework, I added the model, and I added the accomplishment. Then you could say I built automated training interfaces for astrophysicists in React.js and moved data pipeline to the cloud with Spark, which enabled scientists to conduct 3 times as many ML experiences. Okay, so that's an example of how you can soup up. Well, soup up is not the wrong word. Correctly present your cert. And let's say you're at a club like the Caltech RoboSub team or robotics team, which I'm a part of. You could say something like, "Oh, I wrote C++ code to detect gates underwater." Um, but it would be much more interesting instead if you said, I built underwater gate detectors using like the algorithms, blah, 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 with OpenCV and C++. Okay, like those are like really marketable skills. People are loving it. And then you say like, oh, I improved the detection times by 2x for the sub, etc. So I think a primary thing here is that you know you might say to yourself, well, actually, I don't know like how much impact I made, or like it was still at the prototyping stage, so I can't say like what my accomplishment is. And so this is something that's I'm going to really like hammer at the end of the presentation, which is like you need to proactively measure the impact of your work, um, like all the time. Because if someone else is not going to tell you to like measure the impact, then you just don't. Then no one will ever know like how like what was the point of what you did. And so it's always good to keep a plan of, okay, if I'm going into this job, right? Like what's the baseline? What already exists? And then when I do something, what can I measure to see like how much it improved people's experiences? Even if it's something like, oh, I send like other developers a survey after I created this tool, and I give them a survey like, oh, how much more do you like this experience as opposed to the former experience? Now you have a number that you can use to sell what you did. Or if you like, if it's something mechanical or like software related, then measure the performance. So all these things will help you build like a solid resume. Okay, so oops, um, and that's kind of yes, essentially what I touched on um, previously is this challenging, right? How can I measure and quantify my impact? What skills and technologies am I using and learning about? And then how am I able to exercise my problem solving skills? Even if it's not directly related to a job that you're looking for, any level of like interesting problem solving is going to be useful to a recruiter. Okay, so I'm going to now talk about getting the interview. But before that, does anyone have any questions about this section? Feel free to just talk or like put into the chat. Okay, well, always feel free to like put something into the chat or just interrupt me if you have any questions. All right, so getting the interview. So now that you send people a great resume, uh, well, how do you actually like um, get the interview? Okay, so it's actually not just about sending people resumes, and that's the key thing I'm trying to convey. So there are multiple ways you can get your foot in the door at Caltech. You can go to the career fairs, you can apply on Handshake, and that helps because essentially people know that you're applying from Caltech. And so even though like sometimes it might go to like their job, like their resume pool, like they know it's a Caltech resume. And so it's usually, it can be better than applying on just the company website. But of course, you can apply from the company website, or you can get recruited at a hackathon or a competition. So those are also really great, but we're kind of more relevant when things were in person. I think one thing I wanted to really communicate is that referrals are a super powerful way to get your foot in the door. And so um, there's like basically a system for people to give referrals at most companies. And if you're like going for a full-time role, they will actually they can get like compensated for a good referral. Like if you get hired at Facebook and I referred you, then I would get like $5,000. So actually people are like somewhat eager to like do these referrals. And there's a ton of people you can ask. You can ask past interns who are your friends, or alumni who are like working there full time. This is a really great website that is really underappreciated. So alumniadvisors.caltech.edu, basically tons of alums who uh, are like waiting to just like give undergrads and students free advice. So this is really great. I've like gone a referral this way, and people like want to help you because they've also been through Caltech. They know what it's like, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and so why are referrals like actually important? So if you look at the data, you actually find that, okay, so we have the pink columns are applicants, blue is interviews, purple is hires. And for referrals, even though they're the smallest number of applicants, they're actually the greatest number of hires, uh, which is like pretty incredible. So like you could, apply for an internet job board, and like your rate of getting that hire would be like drastically lower than through a referral. And I think it's partially because referrals applicants are better in general, but also because you're going to get to that interview stage more readily. Okay, that's a big part of it. So how do you ask for a referral? And by the way, I'm going to be sending all these. I'm going to have a link to the slide at the end. So and you know what? I'll just paste it in here. That might be better. Um, it's like not the proper link, but it's the one I have right now without exiting the slideshow. So let me know in the chat if that doesn't work. Okay, so uh, here I'm gonna give you an example, but general guidelines is keep it short. It's not you don't have to write an essay. Make it personalized. So like, how did you find them? What's your relationship? Be clear about the next step. So um, like, okay, I gave you my resume. Like, should I still apply on the company website? Should I just wait for a recruiter to follow up with me? Um, and then make sure you include your contact information and follow up first with them if the recruiter uh, like hasn't said anything. Of course, like maybe do this in like like 1 or 2 weeks. Like don't because recruiters like take a long time to go through these things. And then if you do like get an interview, um, like, and you have to get a response, then follow up after that. Okay, so let's go through an example. So this is like a formula that usually works for me. So hi, I'm really interested in applying to company for software engineering and autonomous driving. That's like my field. I really love to work at this company because I believe in its mission, uh, you know, some great thing that it's doing. Oops, and it's amazing technology. Uh, Additionally, I'm really into this, topic, and I actually have a lot of great experiences in Caltech robotics team, some technologies, some et cetera, et cetera. So I'd love to have a conversation about working at the company, and if it's possible to ask you to, give me a recommendation or pass on my resume. So uh, even if they're like kind of sketched out by you initially, then you're not like demanding referral. So I think you can at least get like some information about the company, why people like to work there, and if they think you're like solid or legit, then they might give you a referral. This has like even worked for me when I like cold message people on LinkedIn that I have no association with. So don't be scared. Like worst happens is that they just ignore you. So yeah, I would just say experienced people generally want to help you and return the favor. Okay, so now that that's over, let's talk about interviewing. Um, so I'm going to start with behavioral, so that'll be like relevant for everyone. And then I'm going to go more in depth into CS interview examples that I think help to encapsulate uh, like some of the techniques that you want to use while you're doing these interviews. Okay, so again, I'm gonna go to external presentation that I thought put it really well. Um, okay, and then we're gonna let the computer glitch out for a sec while it tries to make this PDF full screen. Great. Um, so uh, for internships, I think there are typically 2 rounds of interviews, possibly 3. Um, and for full-time, usually there's like, it like really varies, but it can be up to like 4 rounds, gets kind of crazy. Usually your first round of interview is going to be behavioral. And so, and it might be just like a phone call, or no on-campus interviews these days. Um, so uh, this, and usually you can tell if it's going to be, it's behavioral if like recruiters is interviewing you, and it's like maybe behavioral if there is a like an engineer interviewing you. So it's going to be something that you can predictably prepare for, right? Substantiate your resume. Why are you interested in the company? And then maybe test your skills with a technical question. And they want to see if you're worth interviewing again. So I think a big emphasis for me is that like this is something you should ace every time. Like you should never be blindsided if someone asks you a question in the first round interview. And I'll get into some of the example questions later. So this is a part usually you can prepare for pretty well, just through memorization. But your second round and later rounds are usually going to be more technical. So for computer science, the reason why they use technical questions, okay, and this is like, you might think like it has nothing to do with like what I actually do on the job. And I've literally had an interviewer tell me this is completely irrelevant to what you do on the job. But the problem is that, and I think a lot of Caltech people kind of have this issue where they're like, oh, like it's so like it feels wrong to just like get jobs through having like good, coding interview skills, right? Because it's like not relevant. So the problem is that everyone can like bullshit what they've done in the past. And so it's really hard to establish like a distribution of candidates um, for the company. And they're, they get like maybe 50 like applications for one role, right? So how do you actually differentiate people? Well, these coding interviews actually give you a pretty decent like gradient on like a ranking of people. And as terrible as that is, I mean, it's like, what is like a more fair way to like interview people, right? Like it's the least, I guess in a sense, it's like less BSable than like other things. And so this is why like we all have to kind of play this dance and like prepare like coding interview skills. Um, I think some companies are moving away from that, doing more like realistic coding challenges or like, but until then, yeah, you're probably gonna have to prepare your coding interview skills for these later interviews for computer science. So let's talk about the behavioral. So first it's going to be, it's always going to start like just pitch yourself to me. Tell me about yourself, lay a first impression. So for me, I usually say like, oh, hi, like uh, I am like a full stack and machine learning developer. And so while I have like really deep expertise and making like cutting edge models work, I also have a broad range of like coding background that allows me to make like bring projects to life. Okay, so it's kind of like slightly opinionated version of a summary of yourself. And so as like a freshman or sophomore, it's not like that crucial that you say like what exactly you're doing. Maybe just add something like I'm a quick learner, or like I'm a strong problem solver, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, these kind of things just set a good tone. Then why are you interested in this company? So don't say it's like for the money. Find like some interesting, compelling reason. So I think there there's some things you can say that is true regardless of the company. So you could be like, oh, I think that like the company, based on like people I've talked to in the past, is composed of like really people with really strong technical expertise, who can provide a lot of technical mentorship. And so I think I gain a lot working alongside this team, and also could contribute a lot, something like that. Okay, and then always have some questions prepared too. So like what at the end of the interview, they'll ask you what questions you have for us. And you might think that, okay, this like doesn't really, the interview's over by this point, right? But in a way, it's not. So like, it doesn't mean like you have to give like crazy good questions. But I've heard interviewers like had give bad impressions when people are just like have nothing to say at this point, because it means that they're not curious or passionate about this company. Like, imagine if you apply to your dream company, you have a ton of questions, right? So if you don't have a ton of questions, then is this really company like something that you're really looking forward to? And so uh, I think my go-to is always, oh, what do you like and dislike? What brought you here in the first place? What's the thing that excites you most about your job? Okay, so now let's go on. Let's move on. Um, so for the behavioral, people will also ask you questions about your resume, and anything is fair game. So if you put some like, let's see, if you put like, oh, I did dynamic programming in CS38, then they might like ask you like, oh, what is dynamic programming? Like, what makes a dynamic programming question um, like a DP question? Or if you put some sort of research, they'll be like, oh, tell me about your research. And let's say they actually know a thing or two. They might be like, oh, why does this work? Why did you do it that way? Like, have you thought about like this or that? I've actually seen people put like super impressive projects on their resume that they just started. Like 1 month ago, I just started um, doing some reinforcement learning project or something. It's like some machine learning, and then the interviewer will just start grilling them about like, do you really know your stuff? And they actually failed the interview because they put something they didn't actually know what they were talking about on the interview. And if the interviewer had asked them like anything else on their interview for the projects that they're actually like, super knowledgeable about, they would have been able to like ace it. And so I think this is, I think most interviewers will understand if you're like, oh, as you can see on my interview on my resume, I started this like a month ago, so I'm still learning about the field. Maybe let's talk about something else. That's like a reasonable thing to say. Um, but if you did it for like a whole summer and you still like can't answer like solid questions about it, then maybe do some research to make sure you not only know your project, but like the background of the field of your project. Okay, and then yeah, be able to like I actually write out um, like a description of what I did that's short and concise. So uh, this allows me to basically like I can like read off of it during the interview, which I think is like totally fair, right? It's like not cheating or anything. And that way, every time I pitch it, it comes out like nice and clear. I think a lot of people will assume to like that interviewer knows like more than they actually do about your project, and you explain it too quickly. And so I think a really good way to like pace this kind of resume driven question. So like you don't want to go into a 5-minute speech about what you did when the interviewer just wanted you to give a summary, and you don't want to give like nothing when the interviewer wants to learn more. And so what I always do is like, okay, so they're like, oh, tell me about experience, and I'll be like, okay, I worked on A at this company, B at this company, and on the side I actually worked on C and during the school year. And I can tell you about any one of these if you're interested, right? Now you just gave them a choice to talk about the one that they're interested in. And okay, and so then you're like, they pick one, and you're like, or maybe just say like pick any of them, and then you're like, okay, fine. So then you go into it, you're like, I did on broad level, I did A, B, and C at this company, and then the same thing. Like and then if you're interested in one or the other, I can go into them, or I can just talk about all of them, and then they pick one, and then you like continue. Okay, and so the reason why I do this is because now like we're both matching like I'm at like going at the interview's like desired speed, right? So I'm like talking about the things that they're curious about, and not giving more detail than is like necessary, but also not being too cursory. So that's a way that I think allows you to just like make sure you don't like rant about your project. I think that sometimes can be a problem. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about coding questions. And sorry for the wall of text here, but this is a pretty comprehensive like list of things that you want to pay attention to. So first, when you're approaching these questions, it's always important to listen very carefully to the question, and like you might be tempted to start thinking about the solution immediately when they say halfway, but they might be leaving out important details, or they might be intentionally leaving out important details to see if you're listening carefully. So then once they give you the question, you want to ask for clarifications, like what is the scale of this problem? Like, do I care about like caching? um, what should I return if we get like some weird input? And like, what is the range of numbers that could be input into system, right? So um, usually, like with LeetCode, right? Let's say you're trying to compute something and on an array, and the length of the array is like 10,000. Okay, so that tells you that you can like the reasonable limit most of the times for these algorithms is that they'll run within like the tens of millions of like steps. So if your if your algorithm is n is equal to 10,000, you could probably run an algorithm that is n squared and time complexity. Um, uh, but you definitely wouldn't want to do something that's like n cubed or like exponential n. And if they're like, oh, your input can be length 1 million, right? You don't want to then propose an algorithm that's like n squared at all, like never, right? Maybe think about, can I solve this in like log n or like just O of n? And sorry if like that doesn't really make sense to you right now. If you're in CS, these are things that you definitely want to learn about. And I'm going to talk about a few resources you can use to get introduced into this coding like paradigm. But uh, that's anyways. That's like a hot tip for how you should ask for clarifications. Next, when you're solving this problem, let's say it's like pretty simple, just like um, sort this array, like just implement any sorting algorithm. You want to think out loud and explain your stumbling blocks as you encounter them, because the interview is not just like, can you solve it? It's like, do I think that, let's say you're on my team, right? And we were solving something together. Uh, would we get to the solution like together? And like, if we have a problem that's not trivial, that's actually really hard, and it will take us like multiple days to solve it, like, does this person that I'm interviewing have a good process for like breaking down a problem, right? Solving it incrementally or looking at it in different ways. So, right, no one expects you to know everything immediately. Uh, Maybe you do, maybe you don't. And so the way you approach this is like break it down, right? Think about, okay, what are like my requirements? What are like some potential solutions? What are some potential challenges? I also often say like, okay, my first instinct is I think that there's some like force way to do this, and it's like pretty slow, but at least we'll solve it, right? And then you make it talk about, okay, what is making it slow, right? So incrementally, you'll go to faster and faster solutions, hopefully, before you get to one that is reasonably good, and you can start coding it. Uh, During that process, you want to really like account for edge cases. So this is when, let's say you have an array, but it's length 0, or you have um, it's it'll really depend on your problem. But make sure you think about those, incorporate them into your program, and then write clean code, but it doesn't have to be perfect code. So it's something you can clean up later, or you can even say, like, okay, this part is not that clean, and so in real life I would come back and clean it up. But and they'll understand that, okay, at least you know whether something is like a problem or not. Finally, I would suggest running through some test cases uh, in your mind. before you say this code is ready to go. So some people will be okay with you testing it on let's say your like coder pad, like online coding platform. But I also suggest running through it yourself because I think it's a slightly better if you're finding your own bugs. It shows that uh, you like have the mental space to like think about everything. And then if you miss a bug, that's fine. Just fix it, and they'll know that you can do that in real life. I think the next thing, and this is actually something I think people don't think about, which is if you're stuck, uh, don't like it's not over. So um, sometimes these problems are intentionally really hard, and they're just interested in seeing like how would you approach this? How would you incorporate help, right? Um, so I think this statement is relevant on two levels. First, is like, okay, if they ask you about a topic you don't know about, then that's fine. Just say I like haven't done it before. They'll ask you something else. If they're giving you a coding question and you don't know how to solve it, just say like I'm I don't know how to deal with like, this, or like I'm a little bit stuck. Do you have any suggestions or like hints? And then if they give you something and then you solve the problem, like that's still great. And you can I like had a Facebook interview, my final interview where I was stuck. I asked the guy for help. Then I solved it, and then I still got the job. Okay, so this is like a legit strategy. So don't ask for help immediately, but if you're like super bummed out, then I think it's fine. And then if you're a freshman, like people, and you're applying to like freshman specific internships, like don't stress out too much. People won't expect you to know like all of it. Um, all right. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to get out of this presentation. Okay, so going back, now I'm just going to give a few more like distilled ideas uh, about interviewing and go through a few practice problems. So this is just for reference. Uh, Feel free to look at this in the presentation afterwards, but these are some common categories of things that you should know. And then for machine learning and data science, these are also some questions I've been asked in the past. Uh, and usually, like with these kind of interviews, they'll be more like, explain this to me, or like explain what you would do in this like situation. So we'll go into a few of those in a bit. Um, let's skip that for now. So I'm just going to reiterate, this is like my 8-step procedure for how to solve these technical interviews. And then I'll do an example. I'll like give an example of like me solving something in the next like few slides. So you want to clarify the question, propose the solution, improve on it, and think out loud while you're doing it. If the idea is good enough, you sometimes I even just ask the interviewer like, does this look good? Like, should I write the pseudocode? They'll be like, yes. Then write like a general outline of what you're going to do. So I would hesitate to jump directly into code because usually um, you'll make mistakes more easily that way. Like you'll forget about edge cases. It'll be bad. So even test like your pseudocode on the example, see if it works. And then once that's good, write the actual code. So you see, like actual coding is like step 6. It's not like step 2, right? So these steps will all like be reasonably quick, and once you like get practice, and so you still have plenty of time to write the actual code and make sure it like runs bug free the first time. Once you wrote it, simulate an example, and then explain like the space-time complexity. Or this is something that maybe you did while you were iterating on it. So just do that at some point in time in the interview. It doesn't have to be at the end. So I'm just going to go through this example. So this is a really common computer science interview. I've been asked this a couple of times. So given a set of words, create an autocomplete function that will output a list of all the words in your output a list of all the words in your set of words that start with a given input prefix. So you have um, this question, all right? Pretty straightforward. What you want to think about while you're solving this, okay? What questions should I like ask the interviewer? What are some edge cases that I can think of? Uh, what constraints am I optimizing for? And what is the time complexity of my solution? So can anyone think of a question that you'd ask the interviewer to try to clarify the problem? Feel free to just unmute or type it into the chat. I'll like wait like 30 seconds. Okay, great. So we got a few. So what is the size of this set of words? So like, would we have to, like, is it super huge? Um, do we have to think about like maybe distributed storage? Okay. For an empty string input, do you return the whole set or nothing? That's like a really amazing question, actually, because you can imagine how frustrated the user would be if they just start typing and then they get like this huge lag while the, the algorithm returns everything. And then how's the set of words represented on the input? Okay, so these are fantastic questions. Um, and then I think a few others that I could ask is, do you care about the space complexity or time complexity? So are we like, do have, like, because there's actually like two potential solutions that you can use that are trade-off of the two. And then another one is what should the order of the words in the output be? So it might not matter. It could just be like anything. It could be sorted, or maybe it would be sorted by, let's say, some frequency number that they would then that they could give you. Okay, so those are all great questions. Then the actual solution um, that I'm not going to go into it, but what you could do here is, let's say you have, you could go through your set of words, and then let's say you have a word that's like tree, right? You could create a dictionary where you store as keys like every prefix that you can make out of tree. So like T, TR, TRE, TREE, and then make those map to a like a set of words. So like TR would map to like tree. But let's say you had trek and like what's another word that starts with tree? Uh, I don't know. Tree, like treetop. That you would put all of those words in like TRE in your dictionary. So then this would be like your storage intensive solution, but returns the solution in like all of one time, essentially. Um, or you could use like a try like data structure. Anyways, it's not important, but like what is important is the fact that you guys have asked really good questions, and that will help you solve the problem. Okay, so next. Um, right, I'm gonna skip this one in the interest of time. So I promised that I was gonna give a little bit of machine learning interview prep. So this is a question that I really like, which is, let's say you wanted to train a model to predict whether a patient is at high risk for colon cancer and should do more extensive screening tests. So uh, what questions would you ask to clarify about this problem, given it's so vague? And how would you make decisions based on these answers? So question asking is very important because in the real world, you have to, like, problems are literally presented like this, right? And you have to really scope out how you want to solve it. So I'm just going to point out a few things that I would ask about. So for example, the first thing is, how skewed is our data set? Because that will change like what kind of model that we would use, or change how we train the model. Um, and then let's say it's very skewed, right? Then you could suggest ways to fix that skew. That's what they would be looking for in a question like this. Another question I would ask is, again, concerned with the data set. So what is the size? Are we talking like 100 or like a million, right? Um, is the data set biased? So let's say our data set is on people in Utah, but we actually wanted to test on people in Mexico. And so like if there is a bias in one way or another, like how could we fix that? And then finally, does our model need to be explainable? So if we're using a deep neural network for this, then it's possible that like we couldn't actually justify why the model made the decision that it made, other than the fact that it's usually correct. So if we need an explainable algorithm, maybe we need to use something closer to like linear regression or like a tree-based model. Okay. And then finally, what kind of data is this? Is this like readings of their blood pressures and they're like just scalar values, or are they images of colonoscopies? And so these are like kind of trivial, but like you have to ask all these questions so that you can actually make like a decent answer. Like if you went straight for, oh, I would like make a neural network that just takes in the data and spits out the answer, that's like very unsatisfactory um, and doesn't actually tell me that you have like real understanding of the problem at hand. Okay. Um, anyways, you can look at this later, but this is kind of like the suggestions that I post. Uh, let's see. And then I just wanted to end our interview section with this problem. And I think I really like this because it outlines a lot of important ideas. So let's say our company wants to build a new photo auto-enhancing product. So how would you go about building this? Okay, so um, the two problems that are really key here that I'm gonna talk about is like, what is our data set, right? Like photo enhancing is not really like, there's no like correct answer. And so you have to really think about like, what would we use to train our model? Like, is there a public data set of photo enhanced images that we could use so we don't have to spend money labeling it ourselves? Or if we have to collect our own data set, how do we account for example, domain shifts? So cell phone images that our users use look very different from the data sets that are available publicly. And so like we have to make sure that we're able to account for that bias or have a data set that's representative of our users. Then the second problem I think is really interesting, which is how do we frame this machine learning problem? Like there's no like one correct answer to do this. So like two potential ways you could do this is you can have a model that takes an image as input and outputs an image, like generates an image entirely. And that could be really effective, but be really slow and like GPU hungry. Instead, we could just have a model like pick a preset Instagram filter that we think would be the best for this image. So it outputs like some classification. And that could be much easier to train, might still actually do what we want without having to go through all the work. Um, and so I think these kind of problems really help the interviewer understand like how much like real world experience do you have, like how thoughtful are you when you approach these ML problems. So I'm gonna go a little bit over time, so sorry about that. But I just wanted to end with, so if you stay over time, what you're gonna hear about is first, like where do you learn more about interviewing? And second, how do you gain the relevant skills you need to put stuff on your resume? Okay, so moving forwards, let's see. I would say with interviewing, it's important to, I don't think it's like critical, but I always like to look up my interviewer on LinkedIn beforehand. So I can see kind of like their range of expertise. Like If they're a database guy, then maybe they're going to ask me about that. Or it may helps me ask more informed questions like, oh, you left, company A for company B, and I'm interviewing for both of these places. Like, why did you do that? Um, then I would, so that's one tip. I would also follow up with your recruiter if they don't respond, which usually is like within a week of, let's say, your last interview. Um, Sometimes recruiters like just forget. Um, like literally, they would have advanced you, but they literally just forget. So this happened to me before. Just like ping them, be like, hey, just wondering if there's any updates. And then finally, I would try to do mock interviews with your friends, your mentors, because there's really something different about doing something live with a person that you can't replicate just through like leak code. Okay, let's see. And then these are really great resources to get better at your these coding interviews. So HackerRank or LeetCode are great websites you can do. Cracking the Coding Interview is a great book that will give you kind of an on the up from the ground like tutorial on like let's say how to like understand time complexity. These are also some good GitHub links that will just give you a bunch of questions to do or give you like a cheat sheet of the data structures that you need to know. All right. And lastly, these are some links about machine learning interviews you can look at on your own time. So we're going to skip the making the pitch at the career fair because I guess it's not that relevant anymore. Just think of it as it's the same kind of ideas that I posed when I talked about how to introduce yourself during a interview. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Now, finally, last thing I'm going to talk about is building skills. Okay, so I think this might be the most important part of this presentation, which is that no matter if you do all these things perfectly, it can still be really hard to find a job unless people are convinced that you have the right set of experiences. So for freshmen, um, I wouldn't stress too much about getting an internship. I think certs are basically like why you go to Caltech in a sense. Like you have access to these amazing research projects with amazing professors who are doing cutting edge technology. And I think oftentimes as a freshman, your cert can allow you to do much more interesting things than you would have maybe doing just like web design at a actual company. So definitely look into those. Tons of amazing CS certs on the website, on the, sorry, the Caltech like website. Then hackathons and competitions are something I really like recommend, especially hackathons. It kind of sucks that everything's online, but don't let that stop you. Like things like Hack Tech, which is Caltech's hackathon, other ones in SoCal and in the area are really great ways to basically pump out a project like from start to finish in 3 days, right? Very compact and time efficient, and possibly win an award. And now that's something you can add to your resume and talk about. That's like really interesting. Also, like these like competitions like Kaggle, Battle Code, etc., are nice for showing that you have that like competency, and it's also something you can talk about. Finally, I think Caltech has a lot of great student organizations. Obviously, I'm going to plug the Caltech robotics team that I'm on. A really great way to learn like machine learning skills. So just like email me if you're like interested and sign you up. The data science club is really awesome. They're doing Kaggle competitions right now, and there's like several others. So the way I got my first internship was through hackathons and through Caltech robotics team. I had like no like relevant industry experience. And finally, doing research during the term just can be kind of difficult, but you can do it for credit. And also contributing to open source are other great ways to add value to that resume. Okay. And finally, this is outdated, but the Career Development Center has a ton of great sessions that you can go and visit. I highly recommend them. That's like half of where all this knowledge it's coming from me, like just like going to all these like workshops. So they do a great job. And yeah, that's it. So let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to unmute or type it into the chat. Here's my personal email that you can email me at. And here's the presentation URL. Let me just plot that real quick. So feel free to go back to this as a reference.
Can you send the presentation URL in a reply email to the email that you sent out to let everyone know about this?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to send that and also recording of this talk, which I guess I can stop recording now. So